you. Thank you all for coming here and for spending like the middle of your day with me. I know that this is precious time, and I really appreciate it. I am going to read to you from Magic for Liars. This book, if you don't know, is about a private investigator who does not have magic powers, and she's totally fine with that. She's fine with it. She doesn't want them. She never wanted them. She's fine. Okay, she's fine. She's totally fine. It doesn't matter. She's fine. She is estranged from her twin sister who does have magic powers until someone shows up in her office and gives her a case, and the case is a murder at a high school for magical teens where her estranged twin sister just so happens to work. But it's fine. She'll be fine. It's fine. She's fine with this. Okay, she's fine. Don't worry about it. I'm going to be reading to you from chapter 4, which is the chapter where this private investigator first comes to the high school for magical teens and gets to see their world for the first time. The drive through the Sunol Hills was as beautiful as the Novocaine that comes before the drill. Once I got off the high-walled freeways, the pockmarked city streets gave way to land that screamed green. Tall, gnarled oaks leaned over the narrow, winding road, casting it into dappled shade and obscuring signage that warned me to watch out for leaping deer. Tiny offshoots from the road appeared at intervals marked with signs for Hollow Stone Ranch or Crystal Brook Farm. I'd gotten intentionally lost down there a few times before, and I knew that if I followed any of those signs in search of roaming horses with warm velvet noses I could stroke, I'd quickly encountered gates informing me that I was on private property and would be shot should I choose to venture any further. Osthorn was no different. The sign by the road read Osthorn Academy in dark, debossed wood with white edging, and after I turned off the road, I started to see signs warning me of the dangers of trespassing. After nearly a mile of driveway featuring increasingly threatening signage, the rooftop of oaks thinned, then parted. The campus spread before me like a dream. As I pulled into a parking space, I peeked in my rear view at the wall of ancient, sprawling oaks behind me. Their branches twisted together, completely obscuring the school from view of the road. I wondered if the school had chosen this location for the camouflage, or if the mages who built the school had engineered the Sunol Hills to suit their need for privacy. I wove through the cars in the tiny visitors' parking lot, trying to look around without being too obvious a tourist. The mist was just thin enough for me to see the grounds in soft focus. The drought-impossible, velvety green lawn that surrounded the school looked like frosting waiting to have a finger run through it. The school itself was a long, low spread of brick and glass windows. It struck me as out of place, unfamiliar. There's not a lot of brick in Northern California, not for a little more than a century. Lots of brick facades in San Francisco, but that's different, glossy and too even in color and somehow thin-looking. It's not hard to tell when a building is trying to pretend that it survived the 1908 quake. Not Osthorn, though. This place was the real deal, pocked and resealed dozens of times. Even from the parking lot, I could see the waver in each window pane, a testament to the age and survival of the glass. There was no flagpole, no clock tower, no football field with blazing white lights. It was a dignified building, a serious place. I had a moment of double vision. If things had been different for me, if I'd been born with whatever thing Tabitha had that I never got any of, I might have walked across that grass as a kid with friends and a future all laid out for me. I might have been handed a totally different life. This place might have been the setting for my teen memories. Not the bleachers at my underfunded public school, not the parking lot at the abandoned bowling alley in the wee hours of the morning, not the hospice bed in my parents' living room. I shook it off. That wasn't the way things happened. There had never been any profit in wondering what might have been. People like me didn't get to want things like Osthorn, and besides, I didn't want it. I didn't want it. I rolled my neck, stretched just enough to let the wound in my shoulder hit my brain with a bright flash of clarifying pain. I had a job to do. It was time to go to work. Ms. Torres should only be a few more minutes, the school secretary rasped. Her voice was a sharp, painful wheeze. The nameplate on her desk read Mrs. Webb. I had a sense that I should not ask for a first name. She was one of those tiny, ancient women whose papery skin is stretched over steel scaffolding. She watched me with the cool eyes of the unimpressed. I tried not to fidget. I tried to summon the courage I imagined I'd have if this was a place I belonged. It didn't help. The door to Torres' office opened with a bang, and a tall boy with wild, dark brown hair stormed out. His dark blue school uniform was ill-fitting in the way of so many teenage boys. Too short in the wrists, baggy through the shoulders. His blazer was wrinkled, and the angle of his gray striped tie spoke to constant tugging. The teen paused, his eyes landing on me. He hit me with a long, intense stare, his protruding Adam's apple working up and down. I was startled by the frankness of his gaze. Then he heaved an enormous head-shaking sigh before continuing on his way out of the office, leaving me feeling like Ophelia in her closet. It was totally beyond me, how a kid who's been handed a winning lottery ticket could look so damn broke. I watched him through the safety glass window that separated the office from the main hallway. He'd already pulled out his phone. His fingers moved over the screen with unnatural speed, and they didn't slow down when he looked up from his phone to throw me a brooding look. "Is that a spell?" I asked. From just over my shoulder came a deep laugh. "Is what a spell? The texting? No, they're all that fast." I turned around to find Marian Torres smiling at me. She was wearing jeans and a nice but not too nice blouse, and I felt simultaneously over and underdressed. I'd spent hours over the weekend figuring out what to wear to a place like Osthorne. What would establish me as a professional, as someone who would solve a murder? What would keep me from sticking out like a splinter? I wound up digging out the clothes I'd worn to the only court case I'd ever been asked to testify in, an adultery job where the husband had followed up my findings by stabbing the wife with an ice pick. He cried more when I told him she was cheating than he did at the sentencing. Next to Torres in my court clothes, I felt like a kid playing dress-up. Great start. We greeted each other. "Did you find the place okay? So glad you can help us. Did you get the contract?" She handed me a satisfyingly fat envelope of cash, which I didn't count so she'd feel like we had a good relationship from the start. I glanced back at Mrs. Webb. She was watching us with the same flat, unimpressed stare with which she'd greeted me. I was already dreading interviewing her. "I'm going to show Ivy the theoretical magic section," Torres said. "Would you like to accompany us?" Mrs. Webb shook her head with a look of regret that did not extend to the uneasy creases around her mouth. "I'm afraid I've just got far too much to do here," she said. "Perhaps another time." Torres led the way out of the office. Her heels clicked on the gray linoleum tiles that floored the hallway. As we passed, I glanced back into the office through the safety glass window. Mrs. Webb didn't see me. Her eyes were on the blank pages of a ruled notebook. She stared at the paper intently. As I watched, she lifted 2 fingers and pinched herself hard on the arm, hard enough to bruise, hard enough that I winced to watch her. The older woman's face remained still as sea glass as she squeezed at her skin. I shivered, and a whisper twined its way through my thoughts. "Wake up." "Is she ill?" I asked, jogging to catch up with Torres' brisk pace. "Mrs. Webb, your secretary. I just noticed that her voice is kind of..." "Oh," Torres said with a grimace, "no, she's not ill. She used a spell to alert the school of an emergency when she found the body in the library. That spell is..." She paused. "It's fallen out of favor. The impact it has on the caster's body is significant." "Permanent?" I asked. "Yes and no," she said. "For many people it is, but Mrs. Webb is working on it. She already sounds much better than she did in November. In a few more months, she'll probably sound normal again." She stooped to pick up a crumpled ball of notebook paper, then tossed it into a big gray trash can that stood watch over the hallway. It looked like every trash can I'd ever tipped over at James Madison Memorial during my reign of apathy. The trash cans weren't the only thing about Osthorne that was familiar. It all felt like a place I'd seen 1,000 times before. There were the scuffed gray linoleum floors lined with lockers, and the walls were frosted with paint that went on fresh every other summer. Asthorne Academy was scratched into several surfaces with what I'd bet was a ballpoint pen. Bulletin boards hung thick with notices. Auditions for The Tempest, lacrosse tryouts rescheduled due to weather, take a number to call Briette Morney for tutoring in math/economics/magic theory. Lost my phone, $50 reward, call Arthur, please, please, please. There it was again. That feeling like maybe in another life, I could have fit in here. I could have auditioned for The Tempest. I could have tried out for lacrosse. It was a feeling like nostalgia, but for something I'd never done. And something I'd never had. "Miss Gamble?" I looked up. Torres was halfway down the hall in front of me, waiting. Her face was set to patient, but something in her posture made me hurry. Classes were in session, and I swiveled my head like a small-town tourist in the big city for the first time. I don't know what I expected to see. Mostly I was shocked by how familiar it all seemed, how recent. The sight of posters hanging on classroom walls took me back to my own note-passing, sneaking chips in my backpack days. Most of the classrooms featured wide windows into the hallway, the glass crisscrossed with wire, and I peeked in at each one to look at the students doodling in their margins. I lingered just long enough to be seen. Let the students wonder who the visitor was. Let them whisper at lunch. Let the word spread that someone was asking questions about the murder. I'd never investigated a murder before, but this part was no different from any other case. Let people know that there are questions being asked, and they'll line up to give you their version of answers. They look so young, I murmured, staring at a classroom full of baby-faced teenagers hunched over tests. The sea of dark blue blazers and crisp white dress shirts was broken up by crests of brightly dyed hair and islands of eyeliner. The kids were filling in Scantron bubbles with number 2 pencils and flipping back and forth between the pages of a packet. Freshmen, Torres intoned with crisp amusement in her voice. They're always younger than you remember. It's easy to forget that 14 is so close to 12, isn't it? I fell into step next to Torres for a few paces, but stopped short before we rounded the corner. I was frozen in place, hypnotized by the lurid orange graffiti that sprawled across a row of sky blue lockers. Samantha is a slut. The letters didn't look sprayed on. Someone had been at this with a fine brush and a steady hand. Torres paused next to me, regarding the graffiti. It's more ordinary here than you expected. It wasn't a question, but it hung in the air between us all the same. I'm not sure. I guess I thought that there would be more, I don't know. I thought it would be different. More cobblestones and gabled windows and moving stairways. Torres laughed, and her laugh said that she had caught my embarrassed grimace. I know, I get it. But at the end of the day, we're just a high school, Miss Gamble. We're a very nice high school. She gestured at a nearby window to the velvety green of the grounds. But we're still a high school. That means gum, graffiti, cell phones, sex ed, stupid pranks, students smoking weed behind the bleachers. She tipped me a wink. If it makes you feel any better, here, I'll show you something magical. She pulled an impressive folding knife from the pocket of her jeans. I confiscated this from a student earlier today. It's not the magical thing, it's just a knife, but watch this. Torres flicked it open. The blade was long with a wicked curve at the tip. She dragged it across poor Samantha's name. Paint peeled from the locker in little blue curls. Torres flicked the knife shut. I ran my fingers across the locker. I could feel the groove in the blue paint, but the screaming orange letters remained unscathed. My jaw clenched. How? I'm not sure. Our graffiti artist used a spell that I've never encountered before. It's probably something they came up with themselves. Our groundskeeper, Francis Sneed, she added as I took out my notebook. He's tried 100 different ways to remove it or paint over it, but nothing's worked so far. He's been working with the head of the physical magic department for weeks now. Can I talk to him, Sneed? Of course, she said. He's the one who'll set you up in staff housing. I blinked at her. In what? The headmaster cocked her head at me as though I was posing a riddle. Staff housing. We have a small apartment available for you to stay in while you're here, unless you wanted to make the drive down from Oakland every day. It made perfect sense. There was no reason to say no. I aimed those thoughts at the twist in my gut, willing it to listen to logic. There was no reason not to stay here, just for a little while. Just for the case. Thank you, I said. Thanks. Yes, I really appreciate that. Ivy, I can call you Ivy, right? I want you to have unfettered access to whatever you need. A tendon stood out in her neck. Nowhere on this campus is off limits to you so long as you don't endanger any students. Talk to whomever you want to talk to. Talk to students, teachers, staff. I don't care. Her eyes shone hard and bright as she stared at me like I had the answers. She took a long, deep breath and let it out slow. I have a responsibility here to make sure that things get set right. The investigators who said that this was a suicide, they let Sylvia down, do you understand? One of my staff members died on my watch, and those investigators barely lifted a finger to get her justice. I'll do my best, I said. And I tried to make her hear the thing I couldn't say because it's the kind of thing you just can't say. I can't bring her back. I failed, though. I could see it in her face. She thought I was nervous. She thought I was uncertain. But she didn't understand yet that I couldn't give her the thing she really wanted. I can never give any of them what they really want. I can't fix a marriage. And I can't undo a lie. And I can't raise the dead. And I can never tell them because they think they just want answers. Yes, you will, Torres said. You will do better than they did. She took another deep breath, and this time I counted. 5 seconds in, 8 seconds out. It was a familiar exercise. I took a mental note. Torres had been through anger management. Anyway, yes, you can talk to our groundskeeper after he gives you the key to your apartment. And you should also talk to the head of the physical magic department, Raul Chaudhary. I'm sure he'll be able to answer any questions you might have about this particular incident. She waved her hands at the word slut, which was still glowing radioactive on the lockers. I ran my fingers over the orange paint again. I had never seen magic done by anyone but my sister. Something in me ached at the knowledge that a child had used their incredible, impossible magic for this. To make sure that after the world ended, when alien archaeologists were digging up the thing that Earth used to be, they'd know that Samantha had been a slut. It hurt even more than the idea that someone had used their magic to murder Sylvia Capley. The idea of some teenager getting stoned and then etching the word slut into history. It burned in my throat like a swallowed sword. Why them? Why do they get the opportunity to waste this? I let my fingers linger on Samantha's name a moment too long, and something under my fingers popped, stinging. I snapped my hand away, startled. Yeah, I should have warned you about that, Tora said. Sorry. I stuck my sore finger in my mouth, glaring at Samantha's name. Samantha, I thought, with unexpected venom. Then I realized that was the whole point. Even if you didn't think Samantha was a slut, you'd remember that she'd stung you. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you all for listening to me read out of that book. I wrote all those words. At least that's what they tell me. Let's chat.
Okay, so that section is kind of indicative of something I wanted to talk about, which is tropes in noir fiction and fantasy fiction. So I noticed you kind of lean into a lot of noir tropes. You've got an alcoholic detective who is kind of in over her head a lot, and everybody's lying and things like that. But for fantasy tropes, you focus more on the realness of this high school and the way that the teenagers relate to each other. There's no dueling class and no magical animals, and nobody wears robes. So could you talk about how you decided to how you decided to do the setting, and how you decided which kinds of tropes to lean into and which ones you wanted to avoid?
I absolutely can talk about that. That's actually one of my favorite things about this book. It's an intersection of fantasy and noir, which are two genres that answer each other really well. Contemporary fantasy, especially magical school fantasy, is very much about options. It's about having more options than we have now, right? The world that I think we all live in together. I don't want to speak for any of you in case you do happen to spend the rest of your time in a world where there are magical schools. We don't have access to the things that people in those worlds have. And so part of the joy of that genre is the idea of, the world that I live in now, the circumstances that I live in now, how I respond to them is all defined by this reality and the boundaries of it. And in a magical school world, you suddenly find out that there's something else that you could have access to, and how does that change how you respond to things? And usually that means everything is better. Noir is the exact opposite of that, right? Noir is in conversation with the reality we live in now, and it's about picking up everything that we think is good and fine in the reality we live in and flipping it over and being like, okay, what's crawling on the underside of that? It's all about confronting the bad. It's about coming directly into contact with corruption and marginalization and the ways that people hurt each other as a result of the circumstances they're trapped in. So bringing fantasy and noir together, I was really able to answer them with each other, right? They fit together like puzzle pieces. Every time a noir trope pops up that's like, look, everything is bad because you're trapped by your circumstances, there's the answer of, okay, but this isn't the same circumstances that you've been trapped in your whole life. There's also magic. How do things change? And every time that there's a fantasy school narrative moment that's like, ooh, wonder and magic, I get to flip over that wonder and magic and say, okay, but look at the underside of this. Look at what's happening to the people in the margins. Look at what's happening as people hurt each other with this. I especially loved doing that with the setting of the magical school. Osthorn Academy, or Asthorn Academy, as I think the students would probably call it. It's a magical school, and we all know what that looks like, right? It looks like a castle, and you have to go through a portal to get there. And when you arrive, it's like wondrous, and there's floating candles, and everyone's going, oh, and there's a really great score that like a really smart director put in there to make sure that you know that this is awesome and wondrous. And there's no such thing as the bullying that we deal with in our high schools. It's totally different bullying that uses different slurs because it's magic time. And, the kids are doing their magic really serious as much as they can. And then maybe as a side hobby, they decide to start developing pranks out of magic instead of using magic to hurt each other and harm each other the way that real teens do. I wanted Osthorn to be different. I didn't go to school in a castle. I went to school at a high school in Fremont, California, which is in the Bay Area, the high school that I went to was exactly like the high school that everybody I know went to who didn't grow up fancy. It had a big fence to keep us from leaving, and the teachers were exhausted, and there was a cop at the school for some reason. And everyone was trying their best and exhausted and failing all the time. There was that linoleum that has like black circles on it. And over time you realize that each black circle is a piece of gum that fell out of a kid's mouth that no one ever picked up. And then it got walked on and walked on and walked on and walked on until it's completely smooth. And if you try and take it up off the floor, you're going to pry up the linoleum altogether. That's what high school is like. Osthorn, like any school, is not defined by the teachers who teach there. And it's not defined by the administrators who are just trying to fight the rising tide of entropy. And it's not defined by the architects who built it or by 4 founders who, set it up in a castle somewhere between 100 and 48,000 years ago, because we're not really clear on timelines. It's defined by the kids. It's defined by the students. That's what teenagers do. They define their space. They define their world. They claim it by decorating it and by defacing it and by trying to leave a mark on it. And that's what Osthorn is. It's not the tropey magic school that feels comforting because it lets you imagine a totally different world. It's a high school that is kind of uncomfortable to go back to because high school is an uncomfortable time in a lot of our memories.
So on that note, a big part of the story is also that this is a magical school story where the protagonist is an adult and does have to go back to high school, and A, is kind of dreaming of the life she didn't have because she's not magic, but B, kind of knows what kids are like in a way, right? Like she psychoanalyzes them. So was there ever a version of this story where the protagonist was one of the students, or did you know from the beginning you wanted an adult in this high school setting?
Oh, I definitely wanted an adult. This book was never a YA. It was never a young adult book because I also love horror. And one of the most horrifying things I can imagine is having to return to high school. Ivy Gamble is really uncertain of herself, and she tries to pretend like she is, right? She's fine. And going back to high school tears all of that apart. Everyone I know as an adult who returns to high school, especially if you go back to the high school that you attended as a teen, there's this moment of like, oh God, this is where it all happened. This is where I thought I figured out who I was going to be. And who am I now? And what would the person I was then think of the person I am now? And what do these teens think of the person I am now? Like I was on an airplane. I've been on a lot of airplanes in the last month. I was on an airplane and I wound up with this very cool teenager sitting next to me. And he lifted up his phone and like swung it around and then yelled to another teenager on the plane, "Scope it." And I have no idea what that means. I have no idea. He could have been doing anything. He could have been saying that specifically to fuck with me. And I was sitting there like, yeah, this is what it's like. This is what it's like to be an adult trying to feel as firm in my footing now when I'm around a teenager who does things and thinks about things and knows about things that are totally inaccessible to me. And this is all amplified by the fact that this is a high school for teens who have magic powers. So the things that they talk about and think about and struggle with have an extra layer of inaccessibility to Ivy. In this world, magic is intrinsic. So it's not something that you can learn. It's not something that's defined by bloodline because that's actually just like secretly racism. It's not something that you can go and buy a gizmo and then you have magic. It's just something that you have or you don't. And so these kids all have it, and Ivy has no way to understand that part of their lives.
Yeah, there's a section I wanted to read about that because I really liked the way you did it. So this is her reading someone's journal. She says, the entry had started out as a reflection on the process of putting the magic together. I've tried looking at it as glass lightning, and that didn't work. I took a blood as sand approach, but the light levels wouldn't support it. I'm starting to think it would be better served by a sponge made of slowly growing roots perspective. So it sounds like a child trying to explain quantum mechanics. Like it.
Absolutely.
How did you I mean, a lot of people just use fake Latin or come up with a very detailed magic system that can be half explained to us non-wizards. So how did you come up with this approach?
So I actually used to work at a tech company. I worked at a UX design consultancy as an administrator. And when I came to work at that company, they were like, we do interaction design and user experience design. And I was like, great. And they were like, do you know what that is? And I was like, yeah, give me the job, please. And I got the job and I called my mom and I told her, I got a job at this company. I think they do inventions. Because during my interview, they kept explaining to me like, oh, well, we do, like user-focused interaction design, and we don't do a lot of wireframes in-house, and, we really like to try and think dynamically, and we have a very iterative process. And this was several years ago, and I was sitting there like, cool, great. Oh, yeah, I also love an iterative process. I love doing that, and I mean, I could clean a wireframe all day. It took me my first year of working at that company before I really understood what any of that meant. And even now, like when I see discourse online about the difference between interaction design and user experience design, I want to climb into a hole and hide. I'm really used to not knowing what people around me are talking about, because of that experience and every other experience in my life. Just to be real. Magic that you can understand isn't really magic, I don't think. The fact that I was able to come to an understanding, an extremely thin understanding, please don't ask me questions about it, of what a wireframe is, or like what personas are for when you're doing interaction design, means that that's not magic, right? That's something that I can learn to understand and comprehend. And ultimately, it's science. Magic that is defined by, I have this stick and I hold it just at this angle and then I say a Latin phrase that means like, chair is an apple now, and then it turns into an apple, takes a lot of the magic away. It makes it into science. It makes it into skill and craft and habit, which is great. All of those things are awesome. But I wanted the magic system in this book to make as little sense to an outsider as interaction design made to me when I was coming into that company. I wanted it to be totally baffling, because that's what magic has to be magic, right? It has to be something that's beyond you. It has to be something that is way outside of your conception of the world. I can pretty much understand Latin phrases. For the most part. I mean, I can't like speak Latin, but if I see a Latin phrase, I have been speaking Latinate languages for long enough that I can be like, oh, that pretty much just means your legs are stuck. I wanted this to be different.
Well, so for me, it really worked because Ivy has no idea what's going on. So I also had no idea what's going on, so it kind of helped me identify.
Ideal.
So I wanted to talk about Ivy a little more. Thinking about noir stereotypes, one thing I noticed is that in another noir book, every time the protagonist would have been like hit in the head with a lead pipe, Ivy instead undergoes deep emotional trauma. How did you kind of plot out Ivy's, because she starts out angry about her family and her past, and then there's different levels of that throughout the book as she learns things about her sister and about her own history. So how did you kind of plot out how to make that kind of match up with the noir beats? Because I felt like it sort of did match up with every time she gets close, something sad happens and she has to start drinking more sort of feel that noir has.
Author self-insertion. I'm a very traumatized person. I have severe PTSD. I have had a traumatic life. And so I know the way that emotional trauma does hit you in the head with a lead pipe. It takes you out of commission. And Ivy's on a timeline. She can't afford to be taken out of commission, so she does what any noir detective would do, right? She gets tanked. She starts drinking to deal with it. And first of all, if you need to hear this, if you get hit in the head with a lead pipe, drinking is not the answer. That will probably make it worse. And if you undergo a severely emotionally traumatic experience, drinking also doesn't help. But for Ivy, it feels like it does. It's a coping mechanism, just like most things in her life and personality. She's on a timeline. She can't afford to deal with these emotionally traumatic events. And so she starts drinking. And the thing is, those beats were really easy to plot out because that's what every noir detective does. Noir detectives get drunk not for no reason, right? They get drunk because they're doing that thing of flipping the nice things in the world over and looking at what's crawling underneath. But in classic noir, those detectives don't get traumatized. Those detectives are just like, it's fine, I'll have a shot of bourbon and a dame will come along and fix my problems. And then that happens. They have the shot of bourbon and the dame comes along and they're like, okay, moving on. As a traumatized person, I know that that's not how that goes. And I wanted to write a noir detective who actually feels her trauma. And the thing is, when you're traumatized and you don't deal with it, it becomes easier to compound that trauma. It becomes easier to expose yourself to situations that will traumatize you again and again and again. And because Ivy thinks she's fine and she's got her coping mechanisms all lined up and it's all going to work out and she doesn't have any feelings about it, she doesn't have to worry about it. She's compounding her trauma throughout this whole book. And she's leaning harder and harder on her coping mechanisms, which include the lie that she is magic, that she starts telling people. Her spiral is something that I wanted to see in a noir narrative that I think I've been missing my whole life.
Well, it's also interesting as a noir narrative because the protagonist actually changes over the course of the book. Like, there isn't going to be a next book that's a complete reset and a new case, right? So was that a goal from the beginning, to have something that's not just going to be the Ivy Gamble Adventures, book 1, book 2, whatever?
Yeah, this has always been a standalone. Although I highly encourage fan fiction, especially of the makeout scene later in the book. I think that books that don't have any character growth or change are boring. I find them uninteresting because I'm interested in characters, right? I'm not a person who's super interested in explaining how the world works. I'm not a person who's very interested in explaining how all the systems fit together. That's just not my thing. It's good for other people. It's not for me. And so what I want to see is characters and how they respond to their circumstances. And if they don't ever change, or the world doesn't change to suit them, then I'm not reading about anything that interests me. So having Ivy change, having her spiral and hit a bottom place and confront her identity and her coping mechanisms and the person who she's let herself become was really crucial to this book being interesting to me to write. And it has to be interesting to me to write because if I'm not interested in what I'm writing, it's going to read boring, and then the reader's going to be bored and they're going to be like, why am I doing this? And they'll throw it into a bonfire, which I would rather they not do.
I've never thrown a book into a bonfire. I have returned some to the library unread, but so I think I have time for one more of my questions, and then we should get to some of what the audience wants to talk about. One thing that was refreshing about this book is that it's a fantasy novel where the problems aren't metaphors for anything; they're actual problems. And one thing that comes up as a big part of that in this book is magic healthcare, and what exactly you can fix with magic and what you can't, as well as related issues like birth control and abortion come up sort of later in the book. I don't want to spoil anything, but so in Harry Potter, which we've kind of been talking about without mentioning, like, everything can be fixed with a potion and a night in the infirmary, right? But in the real world and in your book, that's not the case. So was that something that was always interesting to you as something to explore in this? And why did you decide to do it the way you did it?
I love putting real problems in my books. I don't know if you know, but healthcare is something that is a little bit of a problem right now, in our society that we live in. Um, I I love the idea of magic fixing everything, but even more than that, I love the idea of magic not fixing everything. This isn't a world where you go there and all of a sudden all your problems are solved, and then you have a new set of problems, but actually those are just an adventure. This is a world where, human beings are human beings, people are people, and so they get into bad situations. They get hurt and they hurt each other and they have sex in a way that they don't really think ahead about, and they wind up getting each other pregnant or getting each other sick. And magical healthcare in this book, just like healthcare in the real world, has evolved over time. And not everyone has evolved with it. So in this book, I talk a lot about consent and bodily autonomy in healthcare, both in like life and in this book. It's relevant to my interests. In this book, there's healthcare that's given well and there's healthcare that's given badly, right? These teens have ready and free access to birth control and sexual health resources. But the people who are giving them access to those resources have very human constraints on what they're willing to do and how they're willing to do it. There's a lot of magical healthcare in this book that's like the old way of doing it and the new way of doing it. And there are people who, just like doctors in the real world, are like, yeah, but I've been doing it this way forever. I don't need to change it. I'm not going to read those studies and do continuing education and, learn and evolve as a healthcare professional. I'll just do it this way and it's fine. There's healthcare that's given without adequate consent from the patient in this book, which is something that happens in life all the time. I see a lot of doctors, and some of those doctors will say, hey, I'd like to do this test on you to see about, your muscle response or whatever. And some doctors will just start poking me with a needle to see what my body does in response to that. Usually what my body does in response to that is it makes my mouth go, ow, what the fuck are you doing? These are issues in this book because they're issues in life. And a lot of times, I think as readers, we have an easier time thinking about and confronting those issues when they're in a fantasy narrative. But this isn't, as you said, it's not a metaphor. It's not like, oh, in this world of magic and wonder, there's a potion that someone might give you while doing a don't say no to this potion spell on you, and then your bone gets better, but you don't know how you feel about it. No, it's like, no, someone's invading your body without asking you if they can. And they're doing things to change your body without asking you if they can. Or they're doing things to change your body without adequately explaining to you the risks of what they're going to do and protecting you the way that you should be protected as a patient. It's just in there because it's what we do to each other in the world that you and I live in. Again, I shouldn't assume, the world that I live in. And that doesn't change just because there's magic. We have incredibly advanced medical science right now. And that advanced medical science is as close to magic as I think I can get, because I am not willing to go to enough school to understand it. Having those advanced methods and technologies and medications does not change the fact that sometimes doctors will be like, here, take this drug, without telling a patient why they're taking the drug. Sometimes doctors will be like, here's this advanced technology, I'm doing it at you, without telling the patient, this is going to hurt really bad and it's going to be scary and you need to be able to say no to it at any time during the process. That doesn't change with advanced science. It doesn't change with magic. It's something that we do to each other, and there are real consequences to it, both in the world I live in and in the world Ivy lives in.
Okay. Well, thanks for answering all of my questions. Or I have more, but I feel like I should give all of you a chance. So if someone could grab that blue box right there, it's under that chair in the front row. That is a throwable microphone. It's the pinnacle of Google technology. And
I love
if anyone,
these things. I'm obsessed with them.
would anyone like to ask a question?
Hey, so I really enjoyed the excerpt you read, and I went to like college in the Bay Area, and there was definitely stuff I could relate to with sort of like, seeing other people like going to private schools and I was going to public school and that kind of thing. And I wanted to say, so with magic in your book, you sort of mentioned that it's, something that some people just have and some people don't. And I can't help but sort of, I don't, I'm not going to say it's a metaphor for real world stuff, because it's clear that in your book there's, real world stuff and then also magic, which has its own problems. But I do think, it seems like they're sort of comparable problems existing in parallel. And it was just basically making me think about sort of, especially in the Bay Area, like this distinction between sort of normal people and then like the tech industry and that kind of thing, which in some ways is kind of like magic. Like, let me tell you, when I started working here, I didn't know what anyone was talking about ever. They would be like, hey, can you, did the tap pre-submit test run so that we can use Blaze to build the R binary to generate the post-pilot report or something? And I'm like, what?
I have no idea what you just said.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I just sort of wanted to ask, do you think, like, and I haven't gotten a chance to read the book, but like, I'm just imagining like basically the equivalent of tech companies, but they only hire like magical people, like it's like a magical research, like venture capital and stuff. And I guess I wanted to ask, would you say that the sort of magic in some ways is like, I guess I don't know whether to say it's like people who like happen to be smart, or it did feel like from how you described things that there's almost also an element of like you got lucky, like where it almost feels like how people, some people get to go to a good school either because they're smart, but then also some people, have come from a family with more money. So it just sort of this access to resources feels parallel to that to me, I think.
Yeah, magic in this book definitely is subject to class stratification. I also grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in like within the first tech bubble in the Bay Area, and then, was in the workforce in the second tech bubble. I grew up as a kid in Fremont, which is like the bedroom community for Palo Alto. So I was in it. In this book, as in the school system that I grew up in, there's immense class stratification, right? My high school was a regular public school, but also our population was mostly white, Asian, and Southeast Asian. And the way that school resources happen in the Bay Area, we got more resources than schools that had largely Black and Latinx kids. And also a lot less, what's the word I'm looking for? Like state instituted violence against students on campus. And within my school, which was very, privileged in a lot of ways, we had internal class stratification because there are kids who are designated as gifted and kids who are designated as whatever, the rest, miscellaneous, which is a fucked up thing to do to children. When I was in kindergarten, they took all the kids out of class who the teacher was like, oh, that one I think is good. And they tested us, and then they said, oh, you're smart and good, and so we're going to put you in the smart, good children class. And everyone else, whatever, you go into the regular kids class, I guess. That probably feels fine for you. And that stratification started happening that young and then just continues, right? And there are more resources allocated to those kids who are defined as smart by that test they took in kindergarten and then their ability to cope with ongoing horrific academic pressure. Magic in this world is a little bit like that, right? You get it or you don't. In an early draft of this book, my editor had me strip this plot line out, but it is still part of the built world of the book. There are adults who don't realize that they're magic because they never had access to adults who recognized that magic in them. Because when you're a little kid and you're like, oh, I did this thing, whatever, you don't know it's not normal to do the thing, right? When I was a little kid, I used to go and try and find as many frogs as I could carry at a time. And then I would be like, oh, I did it. That's other kids who I knew weren't doing that. But I was like, well, this is normal and fine because no one told me it wasn't. Right. So if you're a little kid, if you're like in your kindergarten class and you are just for fun, like back and forth turning your shoelaces into licorice, you're like, neat. Oh, that's that thing that you do where you turn your shoelaces into licorice. And if no adult spots you doing that and says, hey, you're turning your shoelaces into licorice, that seems weird. I happen to know about the world of magic, so let's scoot you over to where there are resources for kids like you. If you don't get that treatment, then you're going to make it to adulthood not knowing that you have a gift. There are so many people who I know I grew up with who were gifted and brilliant and creative. And because they were neurodivergent, because they were non-white, because they were poor, they didn't have adults saying, hey, you're smart and special. Go on this track that later is going to lead you to have access to better schools and better networking relationships with other people who are going to go to good schools, and maybe access to teachers who will connect you with scholarships so that you can do things like take SAT classes that only exist to teach you how to game a test. They didn't have access to those resources, and so they have a really different life than I have, even though they're exactly as smart as I am. That's absolutely a class issue, and magic in this book is a class issue. I don't want to say it's a metaphor for a class issue because class issues still exist, right? These kids are going to a nice-ass school. They're going to a school in the Sonoma Hills, which is one of the ruraler parts of the San Francisco Bay Area. Very pretty, lots of horse girls. It's a school that is a private campus, right? It's a boarding school. It's really pretty. It's well-maintained. They have a groundskeeper on site. These are not poor kids. These are not kids who are unsure of where their next meal is going to come from. And that's a part of the fabric of the school and the stresses that the kids face. They're real stresses. There's real pressure on them. And a lot of that pressure is the same pressure that my classmates faced in the You're Very Fancy and Smart classes that I took. That was like, you have to do good, and if you don't do everything right, by the time you turn 18, your entire life is going to fall apart, and you'll probably die in a pit. And so make sure that you do absolutely everything you can, and don't sleep, even though you're a teenager, and your brain is screaming all the time. That's the kind of stresses that these kids are facing, and that's a really different stress from, say, I have magic powers, but I'm still going to high school in the town where I grew up, and I don't have access to any resources to help me with my magic, and I also don't have access to good food, and also my school is cutting the free and reduced lunch program, which actually it's bad because I'm starving, but it's good because it means that I don't have to eat food that is literally cast-offs from privately owned prisons. And I can't afford another pair of shoes, which really sucks because my shoes are falling apart, and I was hoping to try out for track, but I can't. Really different sets of stresses and pressures, right? It's all about setting. This book is set in upper class magic place. And that doesn't mean that there's not class issues that flow throughout the world of this book. Again, just like they flow throughout the world that we live in. I'm kind of angry about them. I don't know if you can tell.
I think we have time for one more audience question if anybody wants to ask one.
How did you get from UX to writing, and do you like it better?
I like it so much better. I was an administrator at this company, at this tech company. It was a really, I don't want to say it's like a fancy company because I don't have contemporary access to like the stratospheres of tech. But at the time I was working there, it was a big deal. It was a great place to work, especially if you were a UX designer or a UI designer. It was a consultancy, very high pressure. But as an administrator, it was a real different experience. There were a lot of different resources being allocated to my department than other departments. It was a lot of support to people who were doing work that I didn't necessarily understand and was trying really hard to learn about on the fly. But if they don't have time and energy and patience to help you understand their needs, you've got to figure it out as you go, right? So like really different from writing, where what happens is I get up out of bed and then I walk my dog and then I come home and I sit down at my desk and I make words go. The work that I did there had a real intense and real different kind of pressure to it. It was all pressure about trying to support very stressed out people whose needs I could not comprehend, as opposed to like, I have a deadline that I have to get done. I got from there to here in a very weird way. On my lunch breaks, basically, I was reading and offering editorial feedback to a friend of mine who was writing short fiction. And I would like read a story and be like, I think this works, I think this doesn't work. And one day I thought, he takes all of my notes and he says that they're really good. I wonder if I could write a story. And then I did. I wrote a story and I went to him and I was like, hey, can you read this story I wrote and tell me if it's a good story? And he read it and he said, some people just aren't meant to be writers, and maybe you should stick to what you're good at, which is telling me about my stories and if they're good or bad. And I went, okay. And I didn't write anything else for 6 months. But over the course of that 6 months, I started to notice that he really took all of my notes. And I really kind of like knew what I was doing. And I was like, maybe I'll try writing another story and I won't invite him to read this one. And I did that and I sold that story. And then over the course of that next year, I wrote 27 other short stories and to date have sold all of them. One of them was a short story called Haunted for Fireside Fiction magazine, which is the same magazine that published STET, my story about autonomous vehicles and the morality of the trolley problem in algorithmic programming. Haunted is about a haunted house, and it's told from the perspective of the house. And that story is completely just me processing, having first gotten my PTSD diagnosis. I was like, I'm going to do some emotions, blah. And I had that story published and got an email through my website from a guy named Dongwon Song. And he said, I love this story. Do you have representation by a literary agent at present? And I went, no, because Dongwon Song was the person who I had always thought if I ever had a literary career, which I'm not going to because I don't want to do that because I'm not good enough to do it, he would be my agent. That's my dream agent. And so I said, no, I don't have a literary agent. Do you want to have a phone call? And he said, yeah. We had a phone call and he said, I love your short fiction. I think it's really brilliant. Do you have anything longer? And I was like, well, not really. I mean, I have this novella about hippos in the Mississippi River and the queer cowboys that love them that I've kind of been like working on, but I don't think it's anything. And he said, well, I'd love to read it and give you some, my thoughts on it whenever you finish it. And I was like, mental note, finish this immediately. And then he said, I love these ideas that you have, but I can't represent you if you don't have a novel, because the way that literary agents work, they take a percentage of your profits, and the profits on novels are scales and scales bigger than on short fiction. So it's just not worth his time for the 10 cents that he would be getting on a novella. And I said, well, that's a real bummer because I'm never going to write a novel. That's too bad. And he said, the thing that he has learned now will make me do literally anything. He said, oh, you don't want to write a novel? And I said, no. And he said, okay, that's fine. You don't have to write a novel if you think you can't do it. And I was like, fine. I guess I'm going to write a novel. And when he gave me his thoughts on the novella, I said, thanks, this is great. I'd love to have a phone call with you. And picked up the phone and I said, how you said I couldn't write a novel? And he was like, I didn't say that. And I was like, well, I came up with an idea. And it was the idea for Magic for Liars. I basically went home after my first phone call with him and sat down and was like, if I was going to write a novel, which I'm not, I guess it would be about this. And that's how I got here. I have now written 4 other novels that are all in the pipeline and like jamming their way to us. There's going to be 3 books dropping in 2020. I'm very scared of that year. And that's how I got here. Basically, all of it is on stubbornness and a dare and men telling me I can't do things. Its primary motivation is spite.
All right, so we're out of time. So Sarah has offered to sign some book plates if anyone wants their book or a book plate signed. Do you want to real quick tell everybody where to find you online if they want to follow along with your future novels?
Yes, I would love to. You can find me on Twitter and other social media, but Twitter is the one that I like really know how to use. My handle is Gailey Frey. It's like my last name, Gailey, and then Frey, Frey, and yeah, that's a Doctor Who reference of old. I am kind of on Instagram under the same handle, and you can also contact me through my website, sarahgailey.com. It's spelled exactly like my name, which is on the cover of my book. And there you can find updates about my book. You can find updates about when I go on tour. You can email me with questions that you think of when you get home tonight. And you can also sign up for my newsletter if you feel like it. It is called Here's the Thing. It's a $2 a month newsletter. You get 2 original pieces of either short fiction, essays, poems, recipes, bullshit that comes out of my brain at very high velocity. And that newsletter pays for all of my healthcare and makes it so that I can walk and stuff, which is like a hobby of mine. That's where you can find me. You can also find my book, Magic for Liars, wherever you get books. I highly recommend your local independent bookstore or your local library or indiebound.com, which is an online retailer that supports independent booksellers. Go team. You can also, if you're looking for backlist, find the American Hippo Anthology, which is about queer cowboys riding hippos in the American Mississippi River Basin. It's Ocean's 11, but gay and hippos, if you want that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming out and talking to us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Google.